The audio. Before we get into the rant proper, let me say that I highly recommend this game. It's about 15 bucks on Steam right now. It's a great game to play to take a break from other games. It's kind of weird to say, but it's kind of really true. But there will be a moment when you will stop playing. Not in a bad way, just I'll get into that once we actually talk about the game a bit. Okay, so let's go. Stories, the path of Destinies. So the game title is a bit cliche. Stories, the path of Destinies. Like, really, I wouldn't imagine a story would be that kind of thing, but whatever. So now the title is a bit cliche, I agree, but pretty straightforward. The game did not turn out the way I thought it was going to be either, which is a pleasant surprise. Let me first say that the game is narrated Stanley Parable style, not by the guy in Stanley Parable, but I mean, the narrator is still great.
The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer.
Julian Casey's been in a lot of great stuff, and he's amazing at what he does, and he also voices all of the characters and makes it work very well.
Oh, I thought you were in danger. I am. The Ravens are coming. Oh, the prison thing. What kind of proof could you possibly have? She said as they landed on the Nexus.
I honestly don't know if I would like the game any more or less if the characters actually had their own voices, although I kind of want to see that one too. The game stars Renardo. No, seriously. The fox who finds a book being held by a child he swore to protect. The kid dies, and now Renardo takes the book to a safe location. The book, however, turns out to be the adventure itself, kind of. The first half of this game is the choose your own adventure style thing. The end of each chapter takes you to the pages of the book that Renardo has taken. At each end, you have 2 or 3 choices to make to get to your next section. There are 5 chapters in a single round of the game, which makes the game kind of short for each round, but collectively it's longer than you would think, because each round of the game leads you to one of many different ends. There's a lot of them, and there's only one canonically good ending. After each run, Renardo restarts back on the ship after the first town, just after he gets the book. Each choice you have yet to pick has a yellow exclamation mark by it. It encourages exploration and a retreading of the paths you might have already taken, but you can also take one little twist extra that makes it a bit different. But this game is not just a picture book. Once you pick a path, it becomes a Diablo-esque adventure action game. You fight crows and crow ghost things. Why are the crows? Like, seriously, why crows? I like crows. They're nice. Foxes too. Why I hate crows? While exploring each map section. And each map section has its own secrets that require different swords to unlock. Yes, swords. You start with a hero sword, but you can also craft a fire, ice, and wind sword, each of which can be upgraded and affect combat in their own ways. You can also level up and obtain skills that make combat slightly easier as you go until fighting becomes an absolute joke. And on top of that, you can find gems that further augment your stats, each gem leveling up the more you find of it, like the more copies you find of it. Now, this seems like a bit of a collectathon, and not really. I mean, it blends pretty well with natural stage exploration, and allows you to customize your approach to combat. Personally, I went for the glass cannon approach for high damage and heal, but not much defense. And now and again, the narrator will chime in, adding in story bits and explanation and little jokes.
It was the sort of path he'd always avoided. The path of responsibility, of seriousness.
Good thing I don't have to clean up around here. How perfect, then, that the Sky Ripper would reappear to be his distraction. And he outlined a slightly complicated plan that involved geese, a net, setting the Farfarer a little bit on fire, Lapino dressing as an old blind toad, and Renardo hiding inside a monstrous watermelon.
Some of which are subtle, others are...
These things could really use a hand. Hey. Hey. I'm a firefox, thought Renardo. This could be the new aerobics craze. Am I right?
Cheesy, but in a good way. The story is one we've all heard with a few twists on the classic hero saves the rebellion idea. There are times when the idea is turned on its head though, and some endings that do the right thing don't really end well for the hero. The game makes you think some choices are obvious, but knows what the choices mean in other stories, and then they kind of play with that expectation. It's like a children's book you can dive into at a time and enjoy yourself. It's not really innovative, but it's not done anything wrong. And the art style adds a certain charm to the game. It's flat shading, it's kind of like a cel shaded thing with brush strokes to make it look like a living picture book. I mean, yeah, there are times where it looks a bit like pixely at certain times and a bit too, like, angular, but that's still, I think it works in its favor. Now, this isn't to say I don't have my fair share of complaints. The biggest complaint I have may be linked to how well my computer functions with games like this, but the controls need some polish. To be fair, I had to go down to low graphics just to get rid of the FPS lag. My tower chugs like a champ on even medium settings. Oh, that's depressing. Movement was a bit slow, and pathing of the character got a bit confused at times. I think the game may benefit some from having a WASD control scheme and leaving the mouse only to combat. It would have allowed more for precise mobility rather than sluggish following the cursor by Renardo. Just run where I am clicking, you son of a... The fighting controls are pretty nice, actually. It's almost entirely mouse-based, and you don't necessarily have to be facing the enemy to attack them. It allows for a more forgiving approach and doesn't punish less skilled players. The areas of the game repeat, and that's kind of part of the nature of rereading a book you like. I was kind of hoping for some new spots to be revealed in later runs, but that's fine. Each part of the story that you do go back to has different context though, as you reveal later story paths and information, and it adds more meaning to locations and moments you may or may not have found before. This also means that the narrator repeats things, but just bear with it and keep exploring different branches. This further helps the player find new paths that they may have not thought of before. Not that it affects the endings that drastically, but it's nice to acknowledge previous runs. And then the next biggest complaint is how the post-game doesn't really hold up. Remember the whole part where you will stop playing this part of the game at some point, and not in a bad way? Well, this is kind of where I had that gripe. Games that have an endgame section, or it feels like one, need to have a good balance of things to do versus the places you've already been to before. Like Fallout, once you beat the game, you have a lot to do, that kind of thing. This one, yeah, well, okay, it's not Fallout, but the point is that once you have an end section, don't make it too bland. It doesn't really hold up here. Nothing really changes aside from the upgrades you carried over, including the floating death orb. It does almost all the work for you.
It was tempted to just stand on the device and let it do all the killing for it.
It's so awesome. So after you get the canonically good ending, there's really no encouragement to go back and get the rest of them unless you're like absolute completionist, in which case, go for it. But it's not bad if you want to retread some of the stories a bit. If you like take a break from it and come back, you can hear the narration again, reread some of the stories and have some fun. It's worth a quick break to dive back into this world and listen to the voice acting again. And I got seriously invested in the characters and their arcs, like they hold a spot in my mind even now, and that's saying a lot. In summary, the game I think is worth the price tag. It brings a fun approach to the table and is a pretty close example of a good Princess Bride style game. Have some fun with this one, you'll fall in love with the simplicity and humor of this hero's tale gone slightly awry. And now my script says, think of an interesting ending. Okay, here.